The clay tablet rests in the half-light, its surface fractured by age, its edges softened by dust. Pressed into it are wedge-shaped marks, shallow yet deliberate shadows caught in stone. Run your fingers across the grooves and you feel resistance, a quiet grain that remembers pressure. The air around it is still, no wind, no movement, only the weight of something ancient waiting to be noticed. You're not here by accident. You were carried to this moment by a rhythm older than history, older than language, older than the idea of beginnings. Long before names were given to gods or stars, this rhythm moved through memory like a tide through stone. It pulls not with force but with familiarity, as if something in you has always known this place, this silence, this dust settling, where time has passed again and again. What if civilization was never a straight line climbing upward through progress and forgetting, but a circle traced in ash and rebuilt from memory? What if the world we call ancient was already old when its stories were written, already standing on the ruins of something deeper? The tablets do not speak of origins with confidence, but with remembrance, as if recalling a world before separation, before shadow and light were forced apart. In these fragments of clay memory survives fire and flood. Stone remembers what voices forget. Beneath the myths of gods and watchers lies a quieter truth pressed into dust and sealed by time. It is not a warning nor a promise, but a presence, a reminder that beneath every beginning sleeps an older ending, and beneath every ending the rhythm resumes. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. The night settles first on the stone. Long before it reaches skin or breath, it cools the surfaces that have waited longest. Rock releases the heat it gathered during the day, grain by grain, molecule by molecule, until the air above it slows and thickens. In the lowlands between rivers, the ground exhales a faint, mineral scent, damp with silt and old water. This is a landscape shaped by patience. Not carved, not forced, but persuaded over time. Southern Mesopotamia lies flat not because it is empty, but because it has been filled again and again. Layer upon layer of fine dust carried by floods that came and went before memory learned how to speak. The earth here is soft, but beneath that softness is weight. Beneath the mud, compressed history is pressed downward, turning absence into pressure, pressure into form. You can feel it underfoot even in stillness. Gravity holding everything in place. Gravity remembering. At night, the rivers no longer announce themselves. The Tigris and Euphrates slip into a quieter register, their surfaces dark, their currents unreadable. Water moves differently in darkness. It does not glitter or call attention. It simply flows, guided by slopes too subtle for the eye-following paths decided, long before human hands traced canals across the plain. The air above the water is cooler, heavier, and carries a faint echo of distant marshes where reeds whisper against one another like breath passing through teeth. Humidity clings close to the ground. It gathers on skin, on stone, on the exposed edges of baked brick. In ancient nights, this moisture would have settled on the walls of ziggurats, softening their sharp lines, blurring the distinction between structure and landscape. Architecture here did not rise in defiance of nature. It rose with it. Mud brick returning slowly to mudstone, sinking gradually into silt. Erosion is time thinking, quietly, without urgency. Above the plain, the sky opens wider than expected. With no mountains to interrupt it, the dome of night feels immense, almost excessive. Stars appear not as decoration, but as structure, fixed points in a moving darkness. Their light, already ancient when it arrives, falls gently onto the land, touching the tops of temples, the curves of canals, the surfaces of clay tablets drying in the evening air. Nothing shines. Everything absorbs. This is a place where sound travels far and arrives altered. A footstep carries. A voice dissolves. Silence is never empty here. It is layered like sediment. Insects pulse softly, not in chaos, but in overlapping rhythms that rise and fall with temperature. Wind moves low, brushing the surface rather than cutting through it. Even the air seems reluctant to disturb what has settled. Long before watchers, before gods were named, before stories were pressed into clay, this atmosphere existed. night after night repeating itself with slight variations like a slow breath taken by the planet itself. The ground cooled, the sky turned, water shifted, nothing rushed, everything remembered. In darkness the land reveals its true scale, daylight flattens it, night deepens it, distances stretch, time loosens. A single step feels smaller, less decisive. Human presence thins until it becomes just another layer, another temporary pressure on the surface. This is not a hostile environment. It is indifferent, and in that indifference there is calm. The ancient climate here was neither stable nor violent by default. It oscillated. Wet seasons brought abundance and danger. Dry seasons sharpened hunger and attention. The atmosphere trained its inhabitants to watch closely to read subtle changes in wind direction. Cloud density, the smell of incoming rain carried across kilometers of open land. Survival was not about speed. It was about listening. At night, listening becomes easier. Vision relaxes. The body leans into other senses. Cool air on the face. The faint grit of dust between fingers. The slow contraction of mud as it releases heat. Even stone makes sound when temperatures shift, tiny adjustments, echoing through massive forms. The land speaks, but never loudly. This is the silence into which the earliest texts would later be born. Not silence as absence, but silence as foundation. Clay tablets formed from river mud carried this atmosphere within them, dried under the same sky, stored in rooms that cooled after sunset. Their surfaces hardened while night insects traced invisible paths nearby. Writing did not emerge in noise, it emerged in stillness. Imagine the plain before cities, before canals disciplined the water, before walls divided space. Marshland stretching outward, reeds bending under their own weight, shallow pools reflecting the stars in fragments, insects thick in the air, amphibians stirring, the smell of decay and fertility intertwined, life everywhere but never concentrated, never accelerated. In geological time, this place is young. In human time, it feels endless. Sediment accumulates faster here than almost anywhere else on Earth. Floods deposit, retreat, deposit again. Each layer smooths what came before compressing memory downward. The past is not erased, it is buried. Compression is a form of preservation. At night, the boundary between surface and depth feels thinner. The ground cools and contracts, pulling slightly away from the air above it. The sky, immense and dark, presses downward with its own weight. Between them, the human body becomes a narrow bridge. Breathing slows to match the environment. Heartbeats space themselves out. Thought stretches. This is not a place that demands belief. It does not persuade or instruct. It simply exists, repeating itself long enough that meaning eventually gathers. Patterns emerge not because they are designed, but because repetition leaves residue. Memory is residue. Atmosphere is memory made breathable. Long before watchers were imagined descending from the sky itself had already shaped expectation. Long before gods were said to walk among humans, the land had already taught what it meant to endure. Nothing here arrives suddenly. Even catastrophe comes as accumulation, rain upon rain, heat upon heat, pressure upon pressure. Night deepens, the stars continue their slow rotation, the rivers move without sound, dust settles, stone cools. The atmosphere holds everything in suspension like a thought not yet formed. This is the world as it waits, not for revelation, not for intervention, just waiting. And in that waiting, something prepares to be remembered. Evidence does not arrive like revelation. It gathers the way sediment gathers unnoticed at first, then undeniable. Grain by grain, layer by layer, it settles into place without asking to be believed. In the deep past, nothing announces itself as truth. It simply remains. Clay hardens, stone resists, marks endure, resists. The Sumerian world left no monuments carved into mountainsides. It left impressions, soft materials pressed slowly into permanence. The earliest evidence is humble. Clay tablets no larger than a hand shaped from river mud, dried in sun or fire, stacked and forgotten, then buried again by time. Their surfaces are uneven, imperfect, scarred by fingerprints and accidental pressure. This is important. Writing did not emerge as poetry or prophecy. It emerged as accounting. Grain counted, sheep tallied, labour measured. Civilization first speaks in numbers because numbers are survival made visible. Cuneiform marks are not decorative. They are efficient. Wedge-shaped impressions pressed by reed stylus into yielding clay. Each mark carries the physics of its making: angle, depth, direction. Writing here is not abstract. It is mechanical memory. The tablet remembers the hand that pressed it. Memory hardened by drying. Gravity preserved in tension. As centuries pass, the tablets change. The lists lengthen. The symbols stabilize. What begins as record becomes narrative. Administrative texts give way to hymns, king lists, incantations, cosmologies. The same medium holds all of it. No hierarchy between myth and mathematics. All are data. All are memory. This tells us something essential. For the Sumerians, knowledge was continuous. The divine and the practical shared the same surface. Archaeology reads these tablets the way geology reads strata. Older layers lie deeper, simpler forms beneath complex ones. But unlike stone text, does not always evolve linearly. Older stories persist alongside newer ones. Some narratives refuse to disappear. They are copied again and again, even when language changes. Sumerian texts survive translation into Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian. The words shift. The memory remains. Cultural continuity behaves like bedrock beneath drifting continents. Among the most unsettling pieces of evidence is the Sumerian king list. At first glance, it appears administrative, a sequence of rulers, lengths of reign, cities named, order imposed. But the deeper one reads, the stranger it becomes. The earliest kings reign for tens of thousands of years. One rules for 28,800 years, another for 36,000. These are not errors of transcription. The numbers are consistent, structured, intentional. Modern readers rush to metaphor, symbolism, mythic exaggeration, but the text itself does not signal metaphor. It records these reigns with the same tone used for later historically verifiable kings. There is no boundary marker saying now we enter legend. For the scribes, this was not a different category of reality. It was earlier reality. Evidence accumulates not only in text but in absence. There are no qualifying phrases, no apologies, no corrections. The king list does not explain why early rulers lived so long. It does not defend the claim, it simply records it. This is how data behaves when it is inherited, not invented. It is passed along without commentary like a fossil embedded in stone, whose origin no longer needs explanation. Archaeological layers support this sense of inheritance. The earliest cities do not appear experimental. They arrive already organized. Urban planning emerges abruptly, streets aligned, drainage systems standardized, brick ratios consistent across regions. This is not the slow trial and error expected from emergent complexity. It resembles memory applied rather than innovation discovered. The ziggurat itself is evidence, not merely a temple, but a geological statement. Artificial mountains built of mud brick, layered, terraced, aligned, rising from flat land as if compensating for something missing. Humans recreating elevation where none exists. This suggests a memory of height, of ascent, of proximity to sky. Architecture as longing fossilized in form. Irrigation systems deepen the case. Channels cut with precision graded subtly to maintain flow across kilometers of flat terrain. Too steep and water erodes. Too shallow and it stagnates. These systems require understanding not only of water but of time. Seasonal cycles, flood rhythms, sediment behavior. This is not primitive engineering, it is ecological literacy. The evidence extends into astronomy. Early Sumerian star lists do not speculate. They catalogue, they observe, repeatedly, over generations. They track planetary movements with patience. Venus cycles recorded long before their meaning is mythologized. The sky becomes a clock, a calendar, a pattern. Mirror to earthly cycles. Sky and land speak the same language repetition. Medical texts offer quieter evidence. Symptoms listed, treatments prescribed, prognoses attempted. No claim of divine healing alone. Observation precedes ritual. The body is studied as system. Failure and recovery tracked. Again, accumulation. Trial remembered. Error preserved. Knowledge sedimented. Then there are the flood narratives. Not singular, not isolated. Multiple versions across centuries. Each one consistent in structure, varied in detail. A great inundation. A chosen survivor. Preservation of life. Reset. These stories are not theological inventions in isolation. They echo geological reality. Southern Mesopotamia floods catastrophically. It always has. Sediment layers confirm it. Entire settlements buried beneath silt. Abrupt discontinuities in habitation. In the geological record, floods leave sharp boundaries. Below them one world, above them another. Archaeology mirrors this pattern. Cultures interrupted, then resumed. Different material styles, different practices. The flood is not metaphor alone. It is environment remembered through narrative. The Anunnaki appear within this evidentiary landscape, not as fantasy, but as explanatory placeholders. They function as agents of order. Deciders, organizers. They decree fates, assign roles, establish patterns. In systems theory terms, they represent governing variables, forces that stabilize complexity. Whether literal or symbolic, their function is consistent. The Apkallu, the fish-cloaked sages, appear repeatedly in texts and iconography. They emerge from water, teach civilization, return to the deep. This is not arbitrary imagery. Water here is origin. Knowledge rises from it, then withdraws. Memory behaves the same way. It surfaces briefly, then sinks. Evidence does not argue. It accumulates. The Sumerian record does not scream that something happened before the Watchers. It assumes it. It builds upon it. It treats the past as already layered, already ancient. Civilization in these texts is not born. It is received. Stone supports this claim. The earliest monumental foundations often predate the structures built atop them. Later generations reuse older bases without matching their precision. This pattern repeats globally. Foundations speak of greater mastery than superstructures. Knowledge erodes over time. Entropy applies to culture as much as matter. The evidence taken slowly does not point to a singular lost event. It points to a condition. A world accustomed to reset, to memory loss and recovery, to cycles of knowing and forgetting. Civilization here is not progress. It is recurrence. By itself, each data point can be dismissed. Numbers exaggerated, myths symbolic, architecture coincidental, but evidence does not exist to be considered individually. It exists to be layered. When layered, a different picture emerges, one that does not require belief, only patience. The Sumerian record is not a prophecy. It is sediment, pressed into clay, baked by time, buried, unearthed. It does not tell us what to think. It tells us what was remembered long enough to survive. And memory once hardened becomes evidence. The anomaly does not announce itself. It does not arrive with thunder or rupture the surface of things. It appears quietly like a seam in stone that does not follow the grain like a mineral vein, running against every rule the mountain seems to obey. At first, it feels like nothing more than a hesitation in the data, a pause where certainty should be. The night air remains cool, the ground remains firm. Yet something has shifted not outwardly but inwardly, where expectation and observation no longer rest comfortably together. In geology, anomalies are often where understanding deepens. A rock layer lies where it should not. A fossil appears in sediment far older than its species is meant to be. A magnetic field reverses itself without warning, leaving its signature locked into cooling basalt like a memory that refuses to fade. These are not errors of nature. They are invitations. Time thinking slowly through pressure, and heat leaves behind contradictions that demand patience rather than dismissal. The Sumerian texts feel like this kind of anomaly. They do not sit neatly within the timelines we prefer. They speak of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, of cities founded before the flood of sages emerging from water to teach humanity writing law and measurement. When read quickly, these accounts feel impossible. When read slowly, they feel unfamiliar rather than false. Like standing before an outcrop where the layers have folded back upon themselves, you sense that the ground has been disturbed by forces too gradual to witness, yet too powerful to ignore. Archaeology tends to favour accumulation, pottery shards, carbon dates, stratified floors built atop older floors. This method is reliable, but it is also conservative. It tells us what survived, not what was lost. When the Sumerians insist that their world was inherited rather than invented, they are pointing to a memory older than their own bricks. Not proof, not explanation, but remembrance. The anomaly is not that they believed this. The anomaly is how consistently they return to it. In the deep silence of night, anomalies become easier to hold. The mind is less eager to resolve them. A contradiction can exist without needing to be corrected. The stars overhead do not align themselves for our comfort. They drift indifferent to our desire for symmetry. In this darkness, the Sumerian numbers, absurd by modern standards, begin to feel less like mistakes and more like signals transmitted from a different scale of time. Time does not always behave as we expect. In ice cores, a few centimetres of compressed snow can represent thousands of years. In sediment, a single flood can erase centuries of gradual accumulation. Erosion is time thinking slowly and without opinion. What if the Sumerians were not describing years as we measure them, but durations as they were remembered? Not the ticking of days, but the weight of continuity. A reign measured not in calendars, but in stability. A king remembered not for how long he lived, but for how long the world remained unbroken beneath his rule. The anomaly widens when we compare cultures. Long lifespans before a great flood appear in Mesopotamia in Genesis and India in Greece. Each tradition frames it differently, yet the pattern repeats. Decline follows catastrophe. Lifespans shorten. Boundaries harden. The world becomes denser, heavier, more resistant. This is not how myths usually behave when invented independently. This is how memories behave when refracted through different languages and beliefs. In geology, when multiple fault lines converge, stress accumulates invisibly until release becomes inevitable. The anomaly here is not any single claim, but their convergence. Texts separated by geography and time echo one another with uncomfortable precision. The seventh figure ascends, knowledge descends. A flood resets the system. Afterward, the world is quieter, smaller, less permeable. These repetitions feel less like coincidence and more like resonance. The night grows deeper. Temperatures fall by fractions of a degree. Stone cools. In this stillness, it becomes easier to imagine a world that operated under different constraints. Not better, not worse, simply different. A world where myth and memory were not separate categories, where instruction arrived clothed in story, because story was the most stable vessel available. Clay tablets crack, but metaphors endure. Anomalies are often treated as problems to be solved. But some anomalies are not errors in the data. They are errors in the frame. When astronomers first observed galaxies rotating too quickly to be held together by visible matter, they did not discard the observation. They adjusted the universe. Dark matter entered the equation, not because it was seen, but because it was necessary. Something unseen was exerting influence. The Sumerian anomaly exerts a similar pressure. Something is missing from our picture of the past. Not a lost continent or advanced machines, but a mode of remembering time itself, a way of understanding continuity that does not break existence into equal units, but flows according to change, disruption, and renewal. Gravity is memory. It pulls everything downward toward what came before, regardless of how high it once stood. The watchers in later traditions are framed as the anomaly's climax. Beings who crossed boundaries that should have remained intact. Teachers who revealed knowledge prematurely or improperly. But within the Sumerian worldview, boundary crossing was not immediately transgressive. The Apkallu move between water and land. Kingship moves between heaven and earth. Knowledge moves between divine and human realms. The anomaly is not the crossing itself, but the point at which the system could no longer absorb it. In nature, systems tolerate stress up to a threshold. A glacier flows until it fractures, a river meanders until it avulses, a forest regenerates until fire becomes too intense. The anomaly is not the disturbance but the accumulation. By the time collapse arrives, it feels sudden, but it has been preparing itself for a very long time. As you lie, listening perhaps to the faint hum of night, consider how anomalies function in your own body. A memory that does not fit, a feeling older than its explanation, a sense of familiarity in places never visited. These are not flaws, they are sediments, layers deposited by experiences that did not fully resolve, but did not disappear either. The Sumerians did not rush to correct their anomalies, they preserved them. They copied the king lists even when the numbers strained belief. They recited flood stories even as cities rose again along the same rivers. They maintained rituals whose origins were already forgotten. Preservation, not explanation, was their priority. In this way, they behaved less like historians and more like geologists, allowing pressure to speak for itself. The anomaly does not demand belief, it demands attention. Like a quiet crack in cooling stone, it asks to be traced, not sealed. In the darkness, without urgency, the mind can rest alongside it, neither accepting nor rejecting, simply observing. This is where understanding begins to shift. Not forward, but deeper. Here, before resolution, before judgment, the anomaly remains suspended. A question without edges, a memory without a date. The night holds it gently as the earth holds fossils, waiting for a future hand to uncover what the present cannot yet name. Silence is not empty. It has weight, texture, temperature. In the deep night, silence settles the way. Fine dust settles on stone layer by layer, softening edges, muting contrast. The air feels thicker here, as if sound itself has been absorbed by the ground. This is the silence that follows catastrophe, but also the silence that precedes memory. It is not absence, it is compression. In geology, silence appears as unconformity, a gap in the rock record where millions of years are missing, not because nothing happened, but because what happened left no trace that survived. Entire mountain ranges can rise and erode back into sediment without leaving a clear signature. Rivers can change course, climates can shift, ecosystems can bloom and vanish, all within layers that never make it into stone. The rock does not lie. It simply does not remember everything. History works the same way. What we call silence in the historical record is not a pause in human existence, but a pause in preservation. Wood rots, cloth decays, voices fade, only what hardens survives. Clay baked by fire, stone cut deeply enough, bone mineralized slowly in the right conditions. Everything else returns to dust. Silence, then, is the natural state of the past. Speech is the exception. The Sumerian texts stand at the edge of an immense silence. They are the first hardened memories humanity produced pressed into clay, while the world was still wet and unstable. When they speak of ages before the flood, they are not filling a gap with invention. They are gesturing toward a vast quiet behind them, a time already half forgotten even as a writing was born. Their words feel cautious, repetitive, ritualized, as if spoken to prevent something from slipping away completely. Between the lines of the tablets there is more missing than present. Names without biographies, cities without foundations, kings without faces. The king lists tell us who ruled, and for how long, but almost nothing about what those rulers did. Tens of thousands of years pass in a single line. This is not the compression of ignorance, it is the compression of loss. Memory surviving under pressure chooses what it can carry. In the stillness of night, silence feels closer. The absence of sound sharpens awareness. You notice the slow rhythm of breath, the distant hum of electricity, the faint settling of structures as temperature changes. These microsounds exist within a larger quiet, like fossils embedded in sediment. Silence does not erase detail, it frames it. The flood itself is a silence maker. Water is a remarkable archivist while flowing, but a ruthless eraser when unleashed. Floods strip soil, collapse, walls dissolve boundaries. They mix layers that were once distinct scatter objects far from their origins and leave behind uniform blankets of silt that flatten complexity. After a flood, everything looks newly simple. That simplicity hides violence. Archaeologists find flood layers as thin bands of mud separating occupations. Above the band, life resumes. Below it, life existed before. The band itself contains almost nothing. That nothing is the silence. It represents destruction so complete that only absence remains. The Sumerian flood stories linger on this boundary because it was visible to them. They could see the scar in the ground even if they could not hear the voices it buried. Silence also emerges through translation. Sumerian gave way to Akkadian, Akkadian to Babylonian. Each transition preserved content but altered cadence, emphasis, nuance. Words drifted, meanings thinned or thickened. What began as lived memory slowly became inherited tradition. By the time later scribes copied the older stories, they were preserving echoes rather than experiences. Silence grows in the spaces between languages. In the body, silence is familiar. The earliest years of life leave no verbal memory, yet they shape everything that follows: attachment, fear, comfort, rhythm. These are laid down before language stored in sensation rather than narrative. When we cannot explain why something feels ancient or familiar, we are encountering our own internal silence. The Sumerian past functions similarly for civilization itself. A childhood remembered only through mood. The Watchers appear later where silence has already accumulated. They are introduced not at the beginning of the world but at the end of an era. Their story emerges in texts that are already interpreting older material. This placement matters. It suggests that what came before them was already obscured. Silence had already done its work. The Watchers step into a world whose foundations are hidden, whose original boundaries are no longer visible. Silence is also political. What survives is often what power chooses to preserve. Temples keep records. Palaces commission inscriptions. Victories are carved in stone. Defeats dissolve into rumour. The lives of ordinary people, the slow adaptations, the local collapses, the experiments that failed, these sink into quiet. When the Sumerians speak of divine kingship and cosmic order, they are recording the surface narrative. Beneath it, unrecorded, are countless lives lived without inscription. At night, the sky reinforces this lesson. Most stars visible to the eye are already dead. Their light travels across silence for years, centuries, millennia before reaching you. You're seeing memory delayed by distance. The gaps between stars are not empty. They are fields of influence gravity, without light structure, without visibility. Silence in space is not absence of activity. It is absence of signal. The silence before the Watchers is this kind of space, a gravitational field of lost events shaping what comes after without being directly seen. The myths orbit it. The numbers gesture toward it. The sages emerge from it. The flood erases it further. What remains is not a clear narrative, but a contour like the shape left when something heavy is removed from soft ground. Geology teaches patience with silence. A missing layer does not invalidate the mountain. It completes it. Without gaps, we would not know where time accelerated or paused where conditions changed abruptly. Silence marks transitions more clearly than continuity ever could. The unconformity tells us something important happened, even if we do not know what. In this way, silence becomes a form of evidence. The fact that the Sumerians spoke so insistently of a time before time suggests they felt its pressure. The fact that later cultures repeated the pattern suggests the silence resonated beyond its origin. This is not proof of lost technology or vanished continents. It is proof of a remembered difference, a sense that the world had once been configured otherwise. As the night deepens, silence grows softer rather than heavier. It becomes a space you can rest in. No demands, no conclusions, just presence. The body responds to this kind of quiet instinctively. Muscles release, breathing slows, attention drifts inward. In this state, the past does not need to be reconstructed. It only needs to be acknowledged. The Sumerians did not try to fill every silence. They allowed gods to remain mysterious, origins to remain distant, numbers to remain vast. They did not resolve their contradictions. They lived alongside them. This may be why their stories endure. Silence left room for transmission. Here in the quiet, before interpretation, before judgment, before explanation, the story pauses. Not because there is nothing more to say, but because something must be felt first. The silence holds what words cannot. It is the sediment in which the next layer will settle. The forgotten epoch does not feel distant. It feels submerged. Like stone steps beneath dark water, its outlines are sensed before they are seen. The air of this time is heavier, warmer, saturated with moisture and possibility. Nothing is sharp yet. Edges have not fully formed. Land, sea and sky bleed into one another, and the world breathes slowly as if still deciding what shape it will keep. Geologically, this is a young Earth's memory. Not the molten chaos of formation, but the long settling afterward when continents drifted with the patience of sleep, when coastlines shifted by the width of a human lifetime, when rivers wrote and erased their own paths repeatedly. This is a planet still thinking. Erosion is time thinking. Deposition is time remembering. The forgotten epoch lives in this rhythm not as a date but as a condition. In the Sumerian imagination, the antediluvian age is not primitive. It is abundant. Kings do not scramble for power, they inherit it from heaven. Cities do not sprawl chaotically, they are placed. Knowledge does not accumulate through trial and error, it arrives already shaped. This is not a world learning to speak. It is a world slowly forgetting how it once spoke fluently. The Apkallu belong to this epoch. Fish-cloaked amphibious emerging from the Abzu, the deep freshwater ocean beneath the earth. Water here is not danger, it is origin. It is archive. To come from water is to come from memory itself. These beings do not invent civilization, they restore it. Writing, measurement, agriculture law, these are not breakthroughs, they are reminders. Notice how often ancient traditions describe teachers as arriving rather than discovering. Knowledge descends, it surfaces, it is given. This language suggests rupture. Something was known, then lost, then partially returned. The forgotten epoch is not a blank slate. It is a palimpsest written over but never fully erased. In climate terms, this epoch would have been unstable, but generous. Higher sea levels, vast wetlands, dense biodiversity, food webs rich and resilient. Humans in such an environment would not have been forced into constant innovation for survival. Stability allows contemplation. Excess allows memory to persist. When environments are forgiving, culture deepens vertically rather than racing forward. The long reigns of antediluvian kings can be read through this lens, not as literal lifespans but as markers of continuity. A king's reign measured not by biological age, but by how long a pattern held. When the river flooded predictably, when crops returned reliably, when the sky's rhythms aligned with ritual. A reign ends when the pattern breaks. The forgotten epoch is characterized by permeability. Between realms, between categories, gods walk among humans, humans ascend to heaven. Water gives way to land without resistance. Boundaries exist, but they are soft, like wetlands, like deltas, like memory before it hardens into history. Stone architecture begins here not as domination but as anchoring. The ziggurat rises not to challenge the sky but to remember it. An artificial mountain built where the land offers none. This is not ambition. It is homesickness encoded in brick. Stone is memory made durable. Gravity is memory pulling everything back to origin. The forgotten epoch also contains its own shadow. Permeability allows richness, but it also allows excess. When boundaries are soft, pressure can accumulate unnoticed. Systems become sensitive. A small change cascades. A warmer climate brings heavier rains. A richer ecosystem supports denser populations. Noise increases. Not metaphorical noise, but literal vibration. Enlil cannot sleep. In the atrahasis, epic humanity's crime is not moral failure. It is volume. The world has become too loud. This is ecological language. Systems exceeding carrying capacity generate stress. The forgotten epoch does not end because of evil. It ends because of imbalance. Before the reset signs appear, not warnings shouted but signals whispered. Floods grow stronger, seasons shift, Crops fail unpredictably. Knowledge fragments. The Apkallu withdraw. Teachers leave. This withdrawal is crucial. When knowledge retreats, it leaves structures without understanding, ritual without meaning, form without function. This is how forgetting begins, not with destruction but with absence. The forgotten epoch fades as its guides disappear. What remains is imitation, practices repeated without context, numbers preserved without explanation, stories copied without lived reference. Civilization continues but hollowed. Geology mirrors this. After a long stable period, thresholds are crossed. Ice sheets destabilize. Ocean currents shift. Methane releases amplify warming. Feedback loops engage. The system does not collapse gradually. It tips. The forgotten epoch does not die slowly, it ends abruptly. The flood is not just water, it is erasure. A solvent applied to memory. Structures dissolve. Archives rot. Landscapes flatten. What survives does so by chance or by design. A boat, a tablet, a story told again and again because it feels important even if no one remembers why. Afterward the world is quieter, cooler, more constrained. Lifespans shorten, boundaries harden. Knowledge must be rediscovered piecemeal. Civilization restarts, but with amnesia. The forgotten epoch becomes myth because myth is what memory becomes when its referent is gone. At night the feeling of this epoch is familiar. The sense of having known something once long ago without being able to retrieve it. A dream half remembered upon waking, a word on the tip of the tongue. The body recognizes what the mind cannot articulate. This is ancestral memory, not genetic detail, but pattern recognition across time. The forgotten epoch persists as rhythm. In agricultural cycles, in architectural proportions, in mythic structures that repeat across cultures, the 7 sages, the 7 days, the 7 heavens. Patterns survive because patterns are harder to erase than facts. Facts require context. Patterns endure independently. This epoch also survives in our discomfort with linear history. The intuition that progress is not guaranteed, that collapse is not failure but phase change, that civilization is a state, not a destiny. These intuitions feel ancient because they are. They were learned the hard way, then buried. As you drift through this part of the story, notice how calm it feels. The forgotten epoch is not frantic. It is slow, heavy with moisture, full of life. It does not fear ending because endings are part of its rhythm. Flood follows fertility. Silence follows abundance. Reset follows saturation. The Sumerians remembered this not as paradise but as difference. A world before constraints tightened, before separation became law, before heaven retreated upward and earth grew heavy. Their texts do not mourn this epoch. They acknowledge it, respect it, place it behind them like a deep foundation. Stone remembers pressure, water remembers shape, clay remembers touch. The forgotten epoch is remembered through all 3. It is not accessible through excavation alone. It is felt through resonance. When a story feels older than its words, when a number feels too large to be accidental, when silence feels meaningful rather than empty. This is the world before the Watchers, not because nothing divine came after, but because something fundamental closed. A door, a permeability, a way of being in which memory flowed freely between realms. What followed was history. What came before was something else, and though it is forgotten, it is not gone. It lives beneath us like bedrock beneath soil, supporting everything while remaining unseen. The reset does not arrive as punishment. It arrives as release. In the language of geology, it is not collapse, but exhalation, the moment when pressure long held within the earth is finally allowed to move. Fault lines slip. Waters surge. Systems simplify. What looked like an ending from within the moment reveals itself for deep time as a rebalancing. The planet does not judge. It adjusts. Before the reset, tension accumulates invisibly. Rivers deposit more silt than they can carry away. Cities grow dense along their banks, voices multiply. Fires burn brighter at night. In ecosystems, this is overshoot. In physics, it is stored energy. In memory, it is saturation. The forgotten epoch reached fullness, and fullness is never stable. Every system that persists long enough eventually reaches the limits of its own success. Water becomes the chosen instrument not because it is cruel, but because it is efficient. Water moves everywhere. It finds cracks. It erases borders. It dissolves distinctions between inside and outside. When floods come, they do not discriminate between temple and house archive and field. All return briefly to the same level. The reset flattens hierarchy. It reduces complexity so that it may begin again. In sediment cores, floods appear as clean interruptions. Fine-grained layers of mud laid down rapidly sealing what came before and creating a clear boundary for what follows. Above the flood layer, life resumes differently. Materials change, tools evolve, patterns shift. The reset is visible not only in myth but in dirt. Earth remembers resets more clearly than it remembers continuity. The Sumerian flood stories carry this geological logic within them. The gods do not destroy out of rage alone. They act because the system has become unbearable. Noise replaces harmony. Humanity's growth exceeds the world's tolerance. Enlil cannot sleep. This is not metaphor, it is the language of imbalance. When rhythms break, rest becomes impossible. Enki's intervention is telling. He does not stop the flood. He preserves continuity, a vessel, seeds, knowledge, craft. The essentials required to restart complexity after simplification. This is not rebellion against the reset, but cooperation with it. Enki understands that collapse without memory leads only to emptiness. Reset requires a thread. In systems theory, resilience is not the ability to avoid disturbance, but the ability to reorganize afterward while retaining identity. The flood is disturbance. The arc is resilience. Civilization survives not in its structures, but in its patterns. Measurement, agriculture, story. These are portable. Stone temples are not. After the reset, everything feels quieter, cooler, slower. Lifespans shorten. The sky feels farther away. The gods withdraw. This withdrawal is not abandonment. It is insulation. Boundaries thicken. Where once realms overlapped freely, now they separate. Heaven rises, earth settles, water retreats into channels. Stability returns, but at a cost. Geologically, resets often coincide with climate shifts, meltwater pulses, abrupt cooling events, changes in ocean circulation. These transitions compress centuries into decades. Species adapt or vanish. New equilibria emerge. The world after is not worse, it is narrower. Options close. Constraints increase. But constraints also enable precision. Human memory after the reset changes character. Stories become moralized. What was once ecological imbalance becomes sin. What was once overshoot becomes corruption. The flood transforms from adjustment into judgment. This shift reflects distance from the event. When lived experience fades, explanation hardens into doctrine. The watchers enter the narrative space opened by this transformation. They become symbols of boundary violation in a world where boundaries now matter. Their descent feels dangerous because permeability is no longer safe. What was once tolerated now destabilizes. The reset recalibrates not only the environment, but the ethics of interaction between realms. In the body, resets feel familiar. Fever breaks. Sleep comes after exhaustion. Breath deepens after panic. These are not failures of the system, they are restorations. The reset is the body remembering how to regulate itself. Earth behaves no differently. Planetary homeostasis operates through cycles of stress and release. After the flood, civilization rebuilds with caution. Cities rise again along the same rivers but with memory of risk. Dikes are reinforced. Myths warn. Rituals emphasize order. Kings reign for shorter spans, reflecting increased turnover and reduced stability. Time accelerates because change accelerates. When systems are smaller, feedback loops tighten. Stone architecture becomes heavier, more defensive. Walls thicken. Boundaries matter. Writing proliferates. Records multiply. Memory externalizes itself because internal continuity has been broken. Where once knowledge flowed through sages, now it must be stored. Archives replace teachers. Clay replaces presence. The reset also alters humanity's relationship to time. Before time was deep and slow, after it fragments. Generations matter more than epochs. Lineages replace continuity. Mortality becomes salient. When lifespan shorten, urgency appears. Innovation accelerates not because humans become smarter, but because forgetting becomes faster. This is the paradox of the reset. Loss generates momentum. Constraint drives creativity. The post-flood world is diminished in scope, but intensified in focus. Humans turn inward. They build vertically. They count precisely. They measure the sky because they can no longer visit it. At night, the feeling of reset appears as surrender. The moment you stop resisting sleep, muscles soften, thoughts loosen, consciousness yields. Sleep is not absence, it is reorganization. Neural systems replay, integrate, prune. What is unnecessary dissolves. What matters strengthens. Morning arrives lighter. The Sumerians encoded this understanding intuitively. They did not curse the flood, they accepted it as necessary. Even Enlil regrets excess, not action. The gods learn as systems learn. Overshoot corrected. Next cycle adjusted. The reset teaches restraint. In geological time, resets are frequent. Mass extinctions punctuate Earth's history. Each one simplifies life dramatically. Each one opens space for new complexity. Mammals rise after dinosaurs fall. Forests return after ice retreats. The world does not cling to its forms, it experiments. Human civilization is subject to the same rule. The antediluvian world was one configuration. The post-flood world is another. Neither is final. The reset is not unique. It is archetypal. It has happened before and will happen again, not necessarily through water, but through whatever medium imbalance selects. The Sumerian memory of reset survives because it was embodied. It was written into clay, but also into habit. Annual rituals reenact chaos and order. New Year festivals dissolve hierarchy briefly, then restore it. This controlled reset prevents uncontrolled ones. Small releases avert large catastrophes. This is the lesson beneath the myth. Systems that refuse to reset eventually break. Systems that reset deliberately endure. The flood is terrifying because it is total, but it is also merciful because it restores proportion. Afterward, the world can breathe again. As you drift through this chapter, notice how your own thoughts slow. The narrative does not rush forward. It settles. The reset is not drama. It is quiet after noise, space after saturation, the exhale after a long-held breath. What comes next is not immediately better. It is simply possible, and possibility after pressure is enough. An echo is not repetition. It is survival. Sound leaves its source, strikes the surface, and returns altered, softened, delayed. What comes back is never identical to what was sent, yet it carries unmistakable lineage. In deep time, echoes are how events persist when structures vanish. Stone collapses, cities dissolve, names erode, but patterns rebound quietly through generations shaped by distance and forgetting. The antediluvian world did not end cleanly. It continues as resonance. After the reset, the earth settles into new rhythms, but it does not forget the old ones. Rivers resume their courses along familiar paths even when banks have shifted. Floodplains rebuild where floodplains existed before. Soil remembers water. Stone remembers pressure. Landscapes carry habit the way muscles do. The world prefers what it has already done. This preference is the first echo. Human bodies carry echoes as well. Our circadian rhythms still track light, as if artificial illumination never arrived. Our stress responses still assume predators and famine. We store fat as if abundance were temporary. These are not flaws. They are memories embedded in flesh. Biology is geology accelerated. Layers of adaptation compressed into tissue. Civilization too echoes itself. Post-flood cities rebuild near the same rivers using similar proportions, repeating familiar layouts. The ziggurat returns again and again, even as its meaning shifts. Once an anchor between realms, it becomes a symbol of order. Later still, it becomes monument. Form outlives function because form is easier to remember. This is how echoes behave. The Sumerian texts preserve echoes with remarkable fidelity. The 7 sages fade, but the number 7 persists. The divine council retreats, but councils remain. Kingship no longer descends visibly from heaven, but rulers still claim celestial sanction. Language adjusts, belief narrows, yet the structure holds. Memory does not need belief to persist. It only needs habit. In genetics, echoes appear as sequences that no longer serve obvious functions yet remain conserved. So-called junk DNA turns out to regulate, to stabilize, to remember ancient viral invasions and extinct pathways. The past does not clean up after itself. It layers. Each layer modifies what comes next. Evolution is not progress. It is accumulation with constraint. Architecture echoes cosmology. The alignment of cities to cardinal directions. The proportion of temples mirroring the sky's divisions. Measurement systems based on celestial cycles. Even when the gods withdraw, their geometry remains. Humans continue to build as if watched from above. Not because someone is watching, but because the habit of being watched shaped behavior for too long to disappear quickly. The echo also appears in fear. Flood myths recur across cultures that never met. The same anxieties surface: water, rising ground, disappearing, order, dissolving. These stories do not require a single global flood to explain them. They require shared vulnerability. Humans settle where water is useful. Water sometimes takes everything back. Memory spreads faster than sediment. At night, echoes are easier to feel. A distant train sounds like thunder. Wind through trees sounds like surf. The brain fills gaps, connects present sensation to stored pattern. This is not imagination. It is pattern recognition operating without urgency. In darkness, echoes are allowed to exist without resolution. The watchers themselves may be echoes. Not literal beings returning, but the memory of boundary crossing reframed in a stricter world. When permeability becomes dangerous, past openness is remembered as transgression. What was once normal becomes forbidden. The echo distorts because the environment has changed. The sound returns altered by the surface it struck. In post-flood traditions, knowledge becomes suspect. Astronomy turns from orientation to divination. Medicine from practice to magic. Teaching from gift to temptation. These shifts do not imply decline in intelligence. They reflect a world where too much knowledge once destabilized systems. Caution replaces abundance. The echo warns. Geology offers a parallel. After a major extinction, ecosystems simplify. Generalists thrive. Specialists vanish. Complexity returns slowly, cautiously. Each new form carries traces of what survived before. Forests that regrow after fire remember soil chemistry altered by ash. Species compositions shift permanently. The echo is not nostalgia, it is constraint. The echo also appears in language. Words for God, ski and authority often share roots. Terms for breath and spirit intertwine. Even when theology diverges, linguistic fossils remain embedded in speech. We speak the past unconsciously. Language is sediment moved by mouths instead of rivers. Ritual preserves echo deliberately. Annual reenactments of chaos and order, controlled inversions, symbolic deaths, and rebirths. These are small resets designed to prevent large ones. Societies that ritualize release manage pressure, those that do not accumulate stress invisibly. The echo teaches regulation. The body responds to rhythm for the same reason. Music calms because it mirrors physiological cycles. Drums echo heartbeats, lullabies slow breathing. Sleep arrives when the nervous system recognizes a safe pattern. Deep time rhythms are embedded in neural circuits. When narrative aligns with rhythm, hypnosis occurs naturally. This is why ancient stories soothe even when they describe catastrophe. The structure is familiar. Beginning, imbalance, reset, continuation. The mind relaxes because it recognizes the cycle. Uncertainty becomes tolerable when it fits a known pattern. The echo reassures this has happened before and something continued afterward. The echo also appears in modern science. Cycles of climate warming and cooling, oscillations in ocean currents, magnetic reversals recorded in stone. The Earth does not move forward steadily, it pulses. Systems overshoot and correct. Models that assume linearity fail because the planet remembers differently. Human history echoes this too. Empires rise, centralize, fragment. Trade networks expand, collapse, reconfigure. Technologies promise permanence, then reveal fragility. Each cycle leaves residue roads, reused laws, adapted myths reinterpreted. Civilization never starts from zero. It resonates with what came before. In personal experience, echoes manifest as déjà vu, as intuition, as the sense that something feels ancient without knowing why. These sensations are often dismissed, but they are data of a different kind. They suggest that the nervous system tracks patterns across scales, connecting individual life to collective memory. The Sumerians trusted echoes. They copied texts whose meanings were already obscure. They preserved numbers that no longer fit lived reality. They maintained rituals whose origins were forgotten. Preservation itself was an act of respect. To discard an echo was to risk losing a stabilizing frequency. Stone remembers vibration. Strike it once and micro-fractures carry that stress indefinitely. Water remembers shape. Flow long enough and channels deepen permanently. Humans remember pattern. Live within a rhythm long enough and it becomes expectation. Expectation guides action even when conditions change. This is why the past feels present. Not because it returns intact, but because it hums beneath everything. The echo is subtle. It does not demand belief. It asks only to be noticed. As you rest in this chapter, allow the idea of echo to replace the idea of loss. Nothing essential vanished completely. It transformed, diffused, softened. The antediluvian world did not disappear. It became background radiation, always there, rarely acknowledged, influencing trajectories without appearing on maps. What comes next is pattern recognition made explicit. The echo prepares the mind to see cycles not as coincidence but as structure. Patterns do not impose themselves. They reveal themselves only after patience has softened the need for surprise. In the long view, nothing stands alone. Events that appear singular from within a lifetime resolve into repetitions when observed across centuries, then millennia. The mind resists this at first. It prefers stories with beginnings and endings, causes and conclusions. But deep time does not move in straight lines. It turns, folds, returns. The pattern is not destiny. It is tendency. In geology, patterns emerge when landscapes are given time to speak. Mountain ranges rise where plates collide, erode, then rise again along the same seams. Rivers abandon channels only to reclaim them generations later. Coastlines advance and retreat, tracing familiar contours even as sea levels change. The Earth does not invent endlessly, it reiterates. Memory is structural. Human history follows the same grammar. Civilizations bloom in fertile margins, stabilize, densify, then strain against the limits that allowed them to flourish. Complexity grows until it exceeds resilience. Collapse follows not as failure but as phase transition. Afterward, the cycle resumes under altered conditions. This is not pessimism. It is physics applied to culture. The Sumerians sensed this pattern intuitively. Their texts do not present history as progress but as succession. Kingship descends, ascends, descends again. Cities rise, fall, are rebuilt. Knowledge arrives, withdraws, returns in fragments. The flood is not unique, it is exemplary. One reset among many remembered because it was foundational, not because it was final. Patterns reveal themselves most clearly in repetition without direct transmission. When separate cultures describe similar arcs, long ages before catastrophe shorten lifespans afterward, divine withdrawal, moral tightening, it suggests shared structure rather than shared script. The pattern does not require coordination. It emerges wherever complexity meets constraint. Night is an ally here. In darkness, the mind stops tracking novelty and begins tracking rhythm. Breath becomes audible. Heartbeats align with thought. Awareness drifts from content to cadence. This is when patterns become perceptible, not as ideas, but as feelings of familiarity. You have been here before, not in detail, but in structure. The pattern is visible in the way myths are arranged. Creation, order, excess, collapse, renewal. This sequence appears in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, India, Mesoamerica. Names differ. Gods change. Landscapes shift. The ark remains. These stories do not survive because they entertain. They survive because they fit reality repeatedly enough to feel true. In systems theory, this is called cyclic stability. Systems oscillate within bounds. When pushed too far, they flip to a new equilibrium. Feedback loops regulate behavior until thresholds are crossed. Afterward, new loops form. The system is not destroyed. It is reconfigured. The pattern persists through transformation. The Watchers belong to this pattern not as initiators, but as accelerants. They appear at the moment when permeability becomes dangerous, when boundaries that once allowed exchange now allow overload. In earlier phases, divine-human interaction stabilized culture. In later phases, it destabilizes it. The same action produces different outcomes because the system has changed. This is why patterns matter more than causes. Causes are local, patterns are global. A flood happens because of rain-melt-water tectonics. But floods recur because landscapes channel water in predictable ways. Similarly, cultural collapses occur because of specific decisions, but they recur because of structural tendencies toward accumulation and overshoot. The pattern also explains why knowledge becomes suspect after resets. When too much information once destabilized systems, future cultures restrict access. Priests guard texts. Initiations limit transmission. Mystery replaces openness. This is not superstition. It is memory encoded as caution. In the body, patterns govern healing. Inflammation rises, peaks, resolves. Sleep cycles repeat nightly. Hormones oscillate. When these patterns break, illness appears. Health is not constant improvement. It is regulated fluctuation. The body survives by cycling, not by advancing endlessly. Civilizations forget this at their peril. When linear progress becomes ideology, feedback loops are ignored. Warning signs are reframed as obstacles. Growth is pursued as an absolute good. The pattern tightens its grip. Collapse becomes more abrupt because release has been deferred too long. The Sumerian texts preserve the pattern without moral urgency. They do not command, they record. Kingship descends because it has done so before. Floods happen because they have happened before. The world resets because it always has. This tone is neither fearful nor triumphant. It is observational. Patterns are most convincing when they appear across scales. The same arc governs rivers and empires, forests and mythologies, nervous systems and star formation. Expansion followed by contraction. Complexity followed by simplification. Silence followed by signal. The universe prefers rhythm to direction. Astronomy reinforces this understanding. Stars form from collapsing clouds, burn steadily, then shed mass or explode, seeding new formations. Galaxies collide, merge, stabilize. Even cosmic structures recycle. There is no final state, only ongoing rearrangement. Time curves back on itself through matter. The human desire for linear history is understandable. It offers reassurance. If progress is guaranteed, suffering can be justified as temporary, but patterns offer a different comfort. They suggest that suffering is not meaningless nor permanent. It is transitional. Something passes through not toward a final goal, but toward another configuration. At night, this realization does not provoke anxiety. It soothes. You do not need to outrun time. You're already inside its movement. Your life participates in patterns far older than intention. This is not diminishment. It is belonging. The Sumerians placed themselves within this pattern consciously. They did not imagine themselves as the first or the last. They inherited cities and expected successors. They copied texts knowing meanings would shift. They built on floodplains despite remembering floods. This was not ignorance. It was acceptance of recurrence. Patterns also explain why the past feels relevant, not because events repeat exactly, but because structures recur. When modern societies experience climate instability, resource stress, Informational overload, the resonance with ancient collapse narratives intensifies. The echo becomes pattern recognition. Anxiety sharpens not because history repeats, but because the rhythm is familiar. This recognition does not demand despair. Patterns are not prisons, they are parameters. Within them, variation is immense. Outcomes differ. Responses matter. Resets can be violent or gentle. Systems can release pressure through adaptation or through rupture. Awareness of pattern allows choice within constraint. The Sumerian contribution is not prophecy. It is perspective. They offer a long view in which human drama is nested within planetary rhythm. Their gods argue regret adjust. Even divine systems are not static. This flexibility is part of the pattern. As you rest with this chapter, allow the idea of pattern to replace the need for explanation. You do not need to know exactly what happened before the Watchers. You need to feel how cycles operate. Knowledge becomes heavier when forced. It becomes lighter when allowed to settle into rhythm. The pattern does not end here. It continues forward, folding the present into its curve. What follows is not repetition, but resonance. The next movement listens for signals embedded in the cycle itself. The warning rarely arrives as command. It appears as pressure, as unease, as systems speaking in quieter languages before they are forced to shout. In the deep past, the earth warned through water levels creeping higher, through seasons drifting out of alignment, through soils tiring beneath the same crops. These were not messages delivered to priests alone, but signals written into temperature, into yield, into sound. When Enlil could not sleep, it was not only divine irritation, it was a system announcing overload. Noise is vibration, and vibration is energy escaping control. Long before catastrophe, the warning was already everywhere. It gathered slowly like stress along a fault line, invisible until release. Rivers carried more silt each year, channels narrowing, currents quickening. Cities pressed closer to water, amplifying dependence even as stability thinned. Harvest became slightly less predictable. Rituals multiplied not because faith weakened, but because reassurance was needed more often. Repetition is the mind-sensing instability. When systems begin to wobble, culture responds first, long before stone breaks. The warning was ecological, social, and psychological at once. It did not say stop, it said listen. But listening requires stillness, and stillness is rare in periods of growth. Momentum convinces those inside it that motion equals safety. By the time danger feels obvious, choice has narrowed. The warning phase is always the quietest part of the cycle. It passes unnoticed because it asks nothing dramatic, only patience and attention to subtle change that most civilizations ignore until collapse arrives inevitably. Geology preserves warnings with indifference. Before volcanic eruption, gases seep. Before landslides, slopes creep. Before ice sheets collapse, meltwater pools invisibly beneath kilometers of frozen weight. These precursors are measurable only to those trained to notice slow change. The Earth does not hide its intentions. It communicates through gradients, through thresholds approached asymptotically. Disaster is rarely sudden from the planet's perspective. It is culmination misread as surprise. In human systems, warnings behave similarly. Complexity creates dependencies that reduce flexibility. Supply chains stretch. Knowledge specializes. When disruptions appear, they propagate faster than understanding. In the Sumerian record, warnings appear as dreams, omens unease among the gods. These are not superstition. They are narrative tools for expressing sensitivity to systemic stress. When the gods argue, it is the system debating its own limits. The Watcher's narrative reframes warning as transgression. Knowledge crosses boundaries. Desire ignores consequence. This framing emerges after resets when societies seek moral clarity to prevent recurrence. Warning becomes prohibition. Instead of listening to gradients, rules are erected. Instead of sensing thresholds, lines are drawn. This is effective for a time, but rigidity carries its own risk. Warnings that are ignored do not vanish. They transform into shocks. What could have been adjusted becomes corrected. The difference is violence. The planet prefers adjustment. Systems prefer learning. When learning fails, force teaches instead. This is the essence of every ancient warning, remembered soft signals, preceding loud, irreversible change that history repeats for those who sleep through cycles of neglect and forgetting. Night itself amplifies warning. Darkness removes distraction and exposes rhythm. Ancient peoples watched the sky not out of curiosity but necessity. Changes in stars preceded changes on land. Comets appeared before upheaval. Eclipses disrupted ritual time. These correlations were not causal but synchronistic. Sky and earth share drivers. When cycles align, transformation accelerates. In Mesopotamia, astronomy and divination were inseparable because both tracked pattern deviation. The heavens functioned as an early warning system, a slow-moving mirror of terrestrial stress. When Venus deviated from expectation, it mattered, not because it caused famine, but because both were expressions of deeper imbalance. Modern thinking separates natural and social signals. This separation blinds. Climate data, economic stress, psychological fatigue all speak simultaneously. When warnings are siloed, none feel urgent enough. The Sumerian gods argued because all domains were connected. Argument was integration. The warning phase is always uncomfortable because it demands slowing within momentum. It asks societies to choose restraint while success still feels possible. This is the hardest moment to act and therefore the moment most often missed. In deep time, warnings are gifts, not threats. They are invitations to adapt before adaptation is forced. Those who learn to read them inherit continuity. Those who ignore them inherit rupture. The past remembers this lesson patiently, waiting for recognition, because warnings are never obsolete, only postponed, until cycles demand attention, through consequence spoken in floodfire, silence and loss. Each time the pattern tightens again before release resets the system into balance once more. Warnings also emerge internally within consciousness. Anxiety rises before explanation. Fatigue precedes collapse. Dreams become vivid before waking disruption. These are nervous systems detecting pattern instability before intellect catches up. Ancient cultures honoured these signals through myth, because myth speaks the language of the body. The gods feel first, humans interpret later. In the Watcher's narrative, desire overrides restraint. Teaching becomes excess. What was once gift becomes burden. This story encodes a warning about timing. Knowledge delivered too quickly destabilizes learners. Systems require pacing. This applies to ecosystem societies and minds alike. Warnings ignored internally manifest externally. Psychological overshoot produces social instability. Burnout scales. When enough individuals ignore inner limits, collective systems fracture. Ancient texts externalize this dynamic as divine displeasure, but the mechanism is consistent limits. Unacknowledged become limits enforced. The warning phase therefore occupies a narrow window. Too early and it feels abstract. Too late and it feels inevitable. This narrowness is why warnings are so often mythologized. Myth stretches time, holding attention longer than data can. At night, myths regain their function. The rational guard lowers, symbol speaks directly. Warning arrives without panic, framed as story rather than alarm. This is how the ancients prepared minds for change without shattering them. The warning is compassion disguised as disruption. It seeks preservation, not destruction, continuity rather than erasure. Only when ignored does it harden into catastrophe spoken too late to soften its impact, yet still part of the same cycle that governs all complex systems without exception forever. The Sumerian contribution to warning is subtle restraint. Their texts do not shout apocalypse. They murmur imbalance. They record signs without prescribing solutions. This neutrality allows each generation to recognize its own position within the cycle. Warning becomes mirror rather than command. This approach aligns with geological patience. Rocks do not instruct mountains how to erode. They simply respond to forces. Knowledge of pattern allows anticipation without panic. The Sumerians trusted time to teach what urgency would obscure. Warnings encoded this way remain usable indefinitely. They adapt to context because they are not rigid. A flood can mean water or fire or collapse of trust. The pattern holds even as expression changes. In this sense, ancient warning stories are technologies. They transmit risk awareness across generations without requiring precise replication of conditions. They function like early sensors tuned to relational imbalance rather than specific triggers. The Watcher's myth represents one such sensor recalibrated for a stricter world. It teaches restraint through fear because fear was now necessary. Earlier epochs required openness, later ones required limits. Warnings evolve because environments evolve. What remains constant is the need to listen before force intervenes. The past offers no rescue, only orientation. It tells us where we stand, not what to do. Each generation must choose response within familiar structure. That choice determines whether warning becomes guide or disaster. History remembers outcomes, not intentions. But patterns remember both waiting patiently for recognition again in every age of expansion, before limits inevitably respond as always. Warning is therefore not prophecy but relationship. It reflects dialogue between system and participant. The Earth speaks through constraint. Societies answer through adaptation or denial. The outcome is not moral but mechanical. Balance restored gently or violently. In the Sumerian memory, the warning before the Watchers was already late. The world had grown loud. Boundaries had softened too much. Reset was unavoidable. Yet even here warning mattered. It preserved a thread. It allowed continuity to pass through collapse. This is the quiet mercy embedded in all ancient warnings. Not prevention of change, but preparation for survival. The past does not promise safety. It offers memory. At night, this perspective soothes. You're not responsible for stopping cycles larger than yourself. You are responsible for listening, adjusting, releasing when needed. This is enough. Warnings are invitations to humility. They ask participation without control, acceptance without surrender, action without panic. The ancient texts remain because they embody this stance. They do not beg belief, they wait. As cycles turn, their relevance returns naturally. Warnings do not expire. They recur with each alignment of conditions. This is why the story continues. It is not finished. It is rhythmic. And as long as rhythm persists, attention remains the only requirement asked of those who listen. The warning phase ends when listening ends. Then the cycle teaches through force instead. Ancient memory records this without anger. Only calm observation across time. A lesson repeated until heard softly before it must shout into the dark again. Sky and earth were never separate in the ancient mind. They were layers of the same system speaking different dialects of a shared language. What moved above echoed below. What shifted beneath answered upward. The horizon was not a boundary but a hinge, a place where forces met and exchanged meaning. In deep time, this relationship was not symbolic. It was functional. The sky regulated seasons. The earth recorded them. Together they kept rhythm. At night this connection becomes easier to feel. The ground cools, air settles, sound travels farther, stars sharpen as if the sky itself has come closer. Temperature gradients flatten, allowing awareness to widen. In such moments, ancient observers watched not out of wonder alone, but necessity. Agriculture depended on stellar timing. Floods followed celestial cycles. Survival required attention to both directions at once. The Sumerians understood this intuitively. Their gods lived in the sky not because the sky was distant, but because it was reliable. Stars returned when expected. Planets traced predictable paths. Against the chaos of floods and droughts, the heavens offered order. That order was mapped onto Earth through architecture, ritual, and measurement. Ziggurats aligned to cardinal points. Cities oriented themselves to cosmic geometry. Stone copied sky. Geology tells the other half of the story. Beneath the Earth's crust, slow currents of heat drive continents apart and pull them together again. These movements influence climate over millions of years. Mountain ranges redirect winds. Ocean basins shape currents. The planet's surface responds to internal motion the way the atmosphere responds to solar input. Earth listens downward as much as upward. This reciprocity produces long cycles. Ice ages align with orbital variations. Sea levels rise and fall with glacial rhythms. The sky sets tempo. The Earth answers with texture. Sediments accumulate differently under changing climates. Fossils mark intervals of abundance and stress. Time becomes layered dialogue between light and stone. In ancient thought, this dialogue was personal. The sky watched. The Earth received. Humans stood between interpreting signals from both sides. When crops failed, eyes turned upward. When earthquakes struck attention, returned downward. Meaning was found in correlation, not causation. This approach did not require precision. It required sensitivity. The Watchers occupy this threshold. They descend from sky to earth, crossing the hinge. Their role is to transmit alignment. Knowledge of stars, metallurgy, calendars, boundaries. When this transmission overwhelms the Earth system, imbalance follows. The narrative encodes a warning about vertical flow. Too much from above destabilizes below. Too little leaves systems blind. After the reset, the relationship tightens. Sky retreats symbolically. Gods become distant. The Earth grows heavier. Human attention shifts downward toward Labour territory survival. Astronomy persists, but as calculation rather than communion. The dialogue continues, but with reduced intimacy. Boundaries harden, yet the connection never disappears. Solar cycles still influence climate. Cosmic radiation still leaves isotopic signatures in ice cores. Meteor impacts still alter history abruptly. The sky does not stop acting simply because belief changes. The Earth does not stop responding simply because attention wanes. In sleep, this relationship resurfaces quietly. Body temperature drops in rhythm with night. Hormones respond to darkness. Dreams align with lunar cycles more often than acknowledged. The nervous system still tracks sky signals unconsciously. Modern life masks this sensitivity, but it does not erase it. The ancients named planets as gods because planets behaved like gods. They moved independently. They influenced fate indirectly. They were visible, yet unreachable. Today we call them bodies and forces, but the relationship remains. The sky shapes probability. The Earth expresses outcome. Geological time reveals how tightly coupled these domains are. Mass extinctions coincide with extraterrestrial impacts or massive volcanic eruptions, triggered by mantle plumes responding to crustal stress. Climate shifts follow orbital changes. Life responds rapidly. Sky initiates. Earth amplifies. Human history mirrors this. Periods of expansion align with climatic stability. Collapse follows environmental stress often driven by factors beyond immediate control. Droughts cold, snaps volcanic winters. These are sky-earth interactions felt socially. The Sumerians recorded them as divine moods. The language differs, the mechanics persist. At night, the idea that sky and earth converse feels less abstract. The stillness allows perception of scale. You lie on a rotating sphere beneath a moving sky. Motion becomes background. Awareness floats. The body relaxes because it recognizes participation in a larger rhythm. Anxiety diminishes when context widens. The ancients built calendars not to dominate time, but to harmonize with it. Festivals marked celestial events because alignment mattered. When rituals matched sky rhythms, societies felt coherent. When misaligned, unease grew. Order was not imposed, it was synchronized. Stone circles, pyramids, temples. These were not monuments to ego. They were tuning instruments. Devices designed to align human activity with cosmic cadence. Their durability ensured memory across resets. Even when meaning faded, alignment remained embedded in structure. Modern science returns to this understanding from another angle. Earth system science integrates atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and lithosphere. Astronomy informs climate models, space weather affects power grids. The separation between sky and earth collapses under complexity. The ancient intuition proves accurate domains interpenetrate. The Watcher's story anticipates this reintegration. It warns against ignoring vertical relationships. Whether interpreted as myth or metaphor, it encodes awareness that knowledge from above carries responsibility. Transmission must respect capacity. Alignment matters more than accumulation. As you drift deeper into night, consider how your own body mediates sky and earth. Breath exchanges atmosphere. Bones hold mineral memory. Sleep aligns circadian rhythm with planetary rotation. You are not separate. You are interface. The sky does not command. The earth does not obey. They negotiate continuously through energy exchange. Humans participate whether conscious or not. Awareness simply restores humility. It reminds the mind that control is limited but belonging is assured. This chapter does not conclude with revelation. It settles with orientation. Upward and downward are directions, not hierarchies. Meaning emerges in between. The ancient world lived here comfortably. The modern world forgot, then began remembering again through data and silence alike. What follows is not ascent or descent, but return. A recognition that cycles do not end. They curve back toward familiarity. The sky remains. The earth endures. Between them, memory waits. The return never announces itself. It arrives as familiarity, as the quiet sense that something long absent has resumed its place without ceremony. In deep time, returns are subtle. Rivers reclaim abandoned channels. Forests spread where stone once dominated. Species reappear in altered forms. What returns is never identical, yet it carries unmistakable continuity. The world does not rewind. It folds. After cycles of separation, boundaries soften again. Not completely, not recklessly, but enough to allow exchange. Knowledge resurfaces in new languages. Old intuitions feel newly relevant. What was once myth becomes model. What was dismissed as superstition returns as pattern recognition. The return is not regression. It is reintegration. In Sumerian memory, this return is implied rather than stated. Kingship descends again after the flood, but in diminished form. Gods still communicate, but through intermediaries. The Watchers are remembered not because they reappear physically, but because the conditions that once allowed them are sensed again. Familiar tensions arise, growth accelerates, noise returns, the system hums louder. Geologically, returns are everywhere. After ice retreats, tundra becomes forest. After fire, grass colonizes ash. These processes feel like recovery, but they are continuation under new constraints. Soil composition shifts, species assemblages differ, yet the underlying drive toward complexity persists. Life returns because life remembers pathways forward. Human societies exhibit the same behavior. After collapse, trade resumes, cities rebuild, knowledge reorganizes, innovations emerge that resemble ancient solutions adapted to new contexts. Irrigation reappears, writing proliferates, astronomy regains importance. The return does not restore the past, it reactivates dormant potentials. At night, this sensation feels like déjà vu without narrative, a calm recognition that the present has been prepared for long before arrival. The body relaxes into sleep because sleep is itself a return. Each night, consciousness yields control and descends into a familiar darkness it does not fear. Morning returns not because it is guaranteed, but because the cycle persists. The Watchers understood as archetype return whenever thresholds blur, whenever technology accelerates faster than cultural integration, whenever knowledge flows faster than wisdom. They are not beings waiting in the sky. They are conditions waiting in systems. When vertical transmission outpaces horizontal stability and balance follows. The return warns through resonance rather than command. This is why ancient stories resurface during periods of rapid change. They are not predictions. They are memories of structure. When modern societies face climate instability, resource strain and informational overload, the same mythic shapes re-emerge because the same pressures reassemble. The return is contextual, not temporal. In biological terms, this is convergence. Similar forms arise independently under similar conditions. Eyes evolve multiple times. Wings appear in different lineages. Civilizational patterns converge similarly. Agriculture hierarchy collapse. Redistribution. The return does not require continuity of lineage. It requires continuity of constraint. The return also operates internally. Emotional patterns reappear when circumstances align. Old fears surface under stress. Old strengths return under challenge. The psyche remembers its own adaptations. Healing often feels like return not because the past was perfect, but because something essential was left behind during disruption and is now reclaimed. In ancient cosmology, the return is often framed as renewal, a new age, a restored order. Yet beneath optimism lies realism. Renewal carries scars. The world after return is altered. Boundaries remain more defined. Awareness lingers. Memory informs restraint. This is how cycles mature. Geology records this maturation in strata. Each cycle leaves residue that influences the next. Soils thicken. Biodiversity increases. Landscapes stabilize differently. The Earth learns not consciously, but structurally. Systems that persist and code feedback from prior resets. Returns become less extreme over time or shift expression. Human culture similarly accumulates memory. Laws codify lessons. Institutions arise to manage risk. Technologies buffer variability. These adaptations extend cycles but cannot abolish them. The return remains inevitable because change remains constant. The goal is not permanence. It is graceful participation. The Sumerians did not expect the return to restore antediluvian abundance. They accepted contraction as part of continuity. Their texts do not promise paradise regained. They acknowledge rhythm. The return is not salvation, it is resumption. In sleep, this acceptance deepens. Dreams recycle fragments of waking life, reassembling them without urgency. The mind returns to unfinished themes, not to resolve them completely, but to integrate them. Memory reorganizes itself through repetition with variation. Each return softens impact. Modern discomfort with returns stems from linear expectations. Progress narratives resist recurrence. They promise escape from cycle, but escape destabilizes. Without rhythm, systems drift. Return offers grounding. It reconnects present experience to deep structure-reducing existential friction. The Watcher's myth revisited becomes less about invasion and more about recognition. When humanity feels watched, it may reflect heightened awareness of consequence. Actions echo, impacts ripple. Surveillance shifts from external to internal. Ethics emerge not from fear of punishment, but from recognition of interdependence. This internalization marks a mature return. Boundaries no longer require enforcement from above. They are sensed from within. This transition does not complete the cycle. It deepens it. Each return invites greater integration. The night sky during return feels different. Stars appear familiar yet distant. The earth feels stable yet dynamic. Awareness expands without tension. This is the psychological signature of alignment. Not certainty, not control. Orientation. The return also carries grief. What cannot be restored is acknowledged. Extinct species do not reappear. Lost languages remain fragments. Forgotten meanings remain incomplete. The return accepts loss as part of continuity. Memory honors absence without attempting reversal. This acceptance allows peace. Systems that deny loss repeat trauma. Systems that integrate loss adapt. The Sumerian memory includes lamentations alongside creation myths. Mourning and rebuilding coexist. The return is incomplete by design. As cycles turn, the return becomes less dramatic. Smaller adjustments prevent larger resets. Awareness improves, yet the fundamental rhythm remains. Expansion invites contraction. Complexity invites simplification. Silence follows noise. The return does not end the pattern. It sustains it. At this stage of the narrative, tension dissolves. There is no climax because cycles do not climax. They circulate. The return is felt as easing rather than triumph. The system settles into another phase, neither beginning nor ending. As you rest here, allow familiarity to replace curiosity. You do not need to anticipate what comes next. You've been here before in form, if not in detail. The return assures continuity without promise. It offers belonging without certainty. What remains is reflection, not as analysis, but as quiet acceptance. The cycle continues because it must. You are part of it because you are here. Reflection is not conclusion, it is settling. the moment after motion when particles suspended in water begin slowly to fall. What remains visible is not clarity yet, but calm. In deep time reflection is how systems integrate what they have passed through without needing to explain it fully. The Earth reflects through silence, through cooling, through the long pause between cycles where nothing dramatic happens yet everything adjusts. At this stage of the arc there is no urgency left. The great movements have already occurred. Atmospheres formed pressures, accumulated systems fractured and reassembled. What remains is awareness, quiet, spacious, unforced, the kind that arises only after struggle has exhausted itself. Reflection belongs to this condition. It does not demand belief. It allows understanding to rest without insisting on resolution. The Sumerian texts end not with triumph, but with acceptance. Kings reign, then die. Cities rise, then fall. Gods argue, then withdraw. No final harmony is promised. What is offered instead is continuity through acknowledgement. The world is not broken. It is cyclical, and cycles do not require correction. They require attunement. In geological terms, reflection appears as stabilization. After upheaval, landscapes settle into new equilibria. Riverbanks harden. Vegetation reclaims disturbed ground. Species diversify within new limits. The Earth does not rush to restore what was lost. It allows what remains to organize itself slowly. This patience is not passive. It is intelligent. Human consciousness mirrors this process. After intense periods of learning or loss, the mind seeks stillness. Information is no longer consumed. It is absorbed. Neural pathways reorganize during rest. Sleep completes what effort begins. Reflection is the mind's way of allowing pattern to sink below awareness where it can guide action without constant attention. This is why the end of the narrative feels quiet rather than revelatory. There is nothing left to uncover. The watchers do not need to be identified. The flood does not need to be dated. The truth of the story lies not in facts, but in orientation. You're not being asked to decide what happened. You're being invited to recognize how things happen. The deepest lesson carried through the arc is not about gods or catastrophes. It is about scale. Human lives unfold within systems vastly older and larger than intention. This does not diminish meaning. It reframes it. Significance emerges not from control, but from participation. To exist within rhythm is enough. Reflection softens the need to assign blame or seek heroes. The Sumerians did not portray themselves as victims of divine cruelty. They placed themselves inside process. Floods came. Knowledge withdrew. Life continued differently. This posture is neither resignation nor optimism. It is realism grounded in long memory. At night, this realism feels gentle. The body releases vigilance. Muscles loosen. Breath deepens. Thought becomes less linear, more associative. The mind drifts across images without needing to organize them. This is not confusion. It is integration. Reflection happens best when the urge to manage fades. In modern context, reflection is often undervalued. Speed is rewarded. Productivity is praised. Stillness feels unproductive. Yet without reflection, cycles shorten unnaturally. Burnout accelerates. Systems destabilize. Ancient cultures preserved reflection deliberately through ritual Sabbath storytelling. These were not luxuries. They were maintenance. The story of what happened before the Watchers is at its core a story about memory. Not memory as archive, but memory as pattern recognition across time. What matters is not whether the Watchers existed as beings, but whether the conditions that birthed their story reappear. And they do. Repeatedly. Whenever knowledge outruns wisdom. Whenever expansion ignores limits. Whenever noise drowns rhythm. Reflection allows these patterns to be noticed without fear. It transforms anxiety into comprehension. When you recognize recurrence, uncertainty becomes familiar rather than threatening. You stop asking how to escape cycles and begin asking how to move within them gracefully. This shift is subtle. It does not announce itself as insight. It feels like relief. like permission to stop pushing against inevitability. The Earth does not hurry, neither must you. The planet has endured resets far more violent than anything humanity has known. Yet life persists, complexity returns, silence follows noise, always. The Sumerians encoded this understanding in their myths without sentimentality. They did not imagine themselves as the centre of history. They understood themselves as inheritors and transmitters. Their role was to remember enough to pass something forward, even if its meaning shifted. Reflection preserves this humility. In the end, reflection dissolves the boundary between past and present. The antediluvian world is not behind you. It is beneath you, supporting every structure built since. The flood is not an event confined to memory. It is a mechanism that continues to operate whenever thresholds are crossed. The watchers are not gone. They are internalized as awareness of consequence. This realization does not burden. It lightens. Responsibility shifts from mastery to attention. You do not need to control the cycle. You need only to sense when you are near its turning points. Listening becomes enough. The night assists in this listening. Darkness reduces input, allowing signal to emerge. The stars move slowly, indifferent to human urgency. The Earth rotates steadily regardless of belief. These constants provide grounding. Reflection aligns the mind with these scales, easing the friction of immediacy. As reflection deepens, the narrative dissolves into feeling rather than thought. Images blur. Stonewater, sky, memory merge into a single texture. This is not confusion. It is unity perceived without analysis. The same unity ancient peoples sensed when boundaries softened before later epochs demanded separation. In this space, questions lose urgency. Answers lose sharpness. What remains is presence, awareness resting inside continuity. The mind no longer seeks origin or destination. It accepts position. This is the final gift of deep time storytelling. Not knowledge to wield, but perspective to inhabit. When you see yourself as momentary yet connected, small yet integral, anxiety loosens its grip. The fear of endings fades when you understand that nothing truly ends. It transitions. Reflection also restores compassion. When collapse is understood as phase rather than failure, judgment softens. Past civilizations are no longer foolish. They are human. Present societies are no longer doomed. They are patterned. Futures are no longer threatening. They are unknown configurations within familiar rhythm. The Earth does not expect perfection. It responds to balance. When balance is lost, it adjusts. Reflection helps individuals and cultures align voluntarily before adjustment becomes forceful. This is wisdom older than doctrine. As the story settles, there is no final image to hold, no monument, no revelation, only the sensation of having drifted through layers of time and returned unchanged, yet subtly reoriented. Like waking from a deep sleep where dreams have rearranged something quietly important. You do not need to remember every detail. Details belong to the surface. What matters is resonance, the feeling that history breathes, that civilization inhales and exhales. That silence is not absence but preparation. The Sumerians would have understood this ending. They placed reflection after myth, not before. Experience precedes interpretation. Only after living through cycles does reflection gain meaning, and reflection itself becomes another layer for future minds to encounter, reinterpret, and carry forward. As you rest here, let go of the need to hold the story together. It will hold itself, like sediment settling. Understanding will arrange itself without effort. Sleep may come, or simple stillness. Both are forms of reflection. Nothing is required of you now. You're not being warned. You're not being taught. You are simply being allowed to exist inside a rhythm older than concern. The world continues, quietly, reliably, and so do you. The reflection lingers even after the story loosens its shape. It continues in the spaces between thoughts where meaning